Time once again for the British Championship game of the day, live from Warwick University. Hello everyone, Andrew Martin reporting, and today we're going to focus on the round 5 game between Grandmasters Chris Ward playing white and Danny Gormally playing black. Of course, Chris Ward, seasoned Grandmaster, former British champion in 1996. Danny Gormally hoping to win the British Championship for the first time. Well, Chris kicked off with d4. And we quickly got a Nimzo Indian defence on the board. The Nimzo Indian is absolutely one of Black's best responses to the Queen's pawn. Black develops quickly, prepares to castle, keeps his pawn structure flexible. Everything's good about it. And Chris responds with one of the sharpest lines, f3, a move which Sheeroff used to good effect against many really strong opponents. So f3, the obvious motivation is that white wants to play e4 and form a centre. The drawback must be that it slows down white's kingside development. And this is a feature of the position which I think black's got to try to take advantage of if he wants to get any sort of good position out of this opening. There are many choices. Gormally plays d5. Totally logical as it stops white from playing e4. White plays a3. And of course, now black's choice is a question of taste. Obviously, he can take on c3 and play c5. This takes play back into the sameish variation. Or he can play, as Gormally does, bishop e7. A retreat, but a pretty solid way to play, as black retains his dark squared bishop for later play in the centre. Of course, this does allow white to play e4. Black takes, white recaptures. And now the point of black's variation is revealed after this next move, e5. Without that move, I think black could be very passive. Indeed, he would end up with a rotten position out of the opening because, well, you have to contest the centre, especially now as white's pieces are still on the starting blocks. So e5 is very well timed, and I think white's got to push forward. Taking that pawn is hopeless. The queen's come off, knight g4, and white just ends up with a rotten pawn formation. So d5 forced, black castles, white plays knight f3, and now bishop comes out to g4. Again, a very logical move, preparing something like bishop c5. Obviously, white was thinking about taking the pawn on e5. So bishop g4, and Chris plays bishop e2. Clearly, he could have played h3 straight away. And after that, black's probably got to take and play as he does in the game with bishop c5. The difference now is, of course, white can put his bishop on d3, which is slightly more aggressive. But after knight bd7, black's got his fair share of the game. Going back to the game then, white played bishop e2. And now, absolutely key move, bishop to c5. It's crucial that black keeps the white king in the centre for the next few moves, which allows him to complete his development and create counterplay. So bishop g5, pinning the black knight. And now, surprisingly, a new move, bishop takes f3. I mean, it's not an idea which departs from the positional obligations of the line. You have to keep the king in the middle. You have to create dark squared play. Yet hitherto, knight bd7 had been more common. Doesn't it? It makes an enormous difference taking on f3. Gormally goes on with his play. He plays a5. I mean, he could have played knight bd7. But a5 just holds up b4. Now, we thought that possibly here, white should have played queen to b3. That puts pressure on the pawn at b7. But Chris decides to put pressure on a different way by playing his knight to a4. And Gormally seems content to give up the bishop pair here with knight bd7. And now we reach the first really critical moment in the game as Chris plays queen to d2. Now, if he takes on c5, black gets very active. After taking on c5, white castles, of course, and now a4. That's an important move, jamming up the queenside pawns. If queen e2, black can play knight b3. And if rook a d1, we go h6 hitting the bishop. The bishop keeps the pin maintained, and now queen to d6. As long as black can control the dark squares, I believe he can get to a satisfactory position in most of these lines. And of course, black's plan now is probably something like knight to d7 and knight to c5. White's bishop pair in this position is ineffectual because the block pawn centre are stopping the bishops from becoming really active. So Chris doesn't like that. He plays queen d2. Gormally hits the bishop. Bishop comes back to e3. Well, kind of like an emergency measure. You know, white wants to castle. Gormally snaps off the bishop and now plays a really excellent move, b5. Well, we were looking at this in the commentary room. I think we expected b6 in this position, which, of course, is solid, but it's a bit passive. After that, I slightly prefer white. But b5, what a move. It seemed to come as a complete surprise to Chris Ward. Suddenly and unexpectedly, black is able to blow open the position. And the point of it is that when white takes, black takes on d5 with the knight. And it's here that Chris misses a chance, I think. But sometimes it's difficult to find the best resource in the position when you've been shocked by what has actually taken place. There's been a sudden turn of events in this game. And Chris played queen f2. What he should play, and which looks slightly paradoxical, is to take the knight, allowing this check, g3, and now queen takes a4. This looks poor for white, but he's got a resource in this position, d6. The bishop attacks the rook on a8, and it's surprisingly difficult for black to actually meet this move. For instance, if black plays rook c8, white goes bishop c6, defending the pawn, attacking the knight. White's doing okay in this position. Even more surprisingly, after d6, if black goes e4, then bishop e2 is a good move. And the point is that black can't take on d6 in this position because of b3, winning the queen. And I wonder if that's the idea that Chris missed. So maybe after d6, black's got to settle for the computer favourite c takes d6, sacking the exchange on a8. So that after queen e2, protecting the pawn, he has rook b8 with, well, I would say an unclear position. The computer gives us as level, but from where I'm sitting, it could go either way. Having missed that, and now coming back to the game, he plays queen f2. Black quickly gets on top after knight b6. And white takes this knight. He could have played knight c5. But then I think we take, knight d7, queen e3, and queen b8. Black is doing absolutely fine here. You see all the actions taking place with the white king still in the middle. This cramps white's style. So going back to the game, Chris takes on b6. Black takes with the pawn. White castles, yes. But black gets the chance to put his knight on c5, which is a fantastic square for the knight. And now you see black has really carried through his main positional idea of the opening to dominate the dark squares. So white plays the very normal idea of putting his rook on d5. That's a really good square for the rook. But at the same time, black finds another extremely good square for the knight on d4. White's struggling in this position because of that lousy bishop. Queen g3 attacks e5. Gormally defends. White plays bishop g4, hoping to activate his bishop. And now rook a d8, after which black's edge is starting to grow, because this logically exchanges the active white rook off the board. So white takes on d8, black recaptures. All the time, black's position is getting better. And now Gormally activates his queen. In comes the queen, putting pressure on white's queen side. And now once again, I think white possibly misses a chance, this time to save the game. I think by this stage, we're really talking in terms of a big white disadvantage. So he has to find only moves. He tried queen c3, hoping to get down to the back and maybe create some confusion. But the computer seems to suggest that queen a3 is the only move. Now you can understand why anybody wouldn't play this move, because it's clear that after the exchange of queens, this is not going to be much fun for white. But Apparently this might be white's best chance. For instance, the king comes up, in comes the white rook activating itself, and after rook d6, king f1, we just say, okay, black makes some progress. Having missed that opportunity, although frankly I'm not sure how many people would ever go for a move like queen a3. A machine might, but a human being wouldn't. Having missed that opportunity, Danny Gormally is quite ruthless from here on in. In fact, he plays really excellently. What he does is to use his queen to molest the white king, harass the king. And this, again, in turn, limits Chris's style. He can't do very much. He's got this passed pawn on b5, but the pawn is pretty weak, and it can't really advance much further as his king is so vulnerable. So basically, black now gets a very strong attack, if not a crushing attack. Bishop e6 check was answered by king h7, and queen d6 hitting the rook was answered by knight takes bishop, queen takes knight, and now rook d8. Black's in full control of this position, and the reason is he's got pressure against the king. So queen e2 threatens mate. That's why white plays h3 and Gormally plays rook d4. Again, when you run this through the machine, it suggests that rook d2 may have been stronger still. For instance, if b3, we go rook b2, and if now rook takes a5, black has e4. Forcing mate, I think, because that's cut the communication of the white queen with the pawn at g2. So white's probably got to go queen d5, trying to keep central, and now queen e3, queen d7, h5, giving the king some space, and black is about to mop up. Well, that's splitting hairs as Gormally finds an equally good continuation, and we can't really argue with the concluding moves because they're very forcing. Basically, white's king is going to be driven out. Queen f2, very good. Queen comes back to f3, trying to defend. The king comes out, and now rook f1. There's a check. Black easily blocks. Rook takes e5, and now the concluding attack is nice. Queen f2 check is answered by king back, and queen f4 check by queen g3, only move. Rook h1, mopping up. And the rest of this game is easy for black, as we'll see. White could have resigned. Black took the queen, rook b5, f4, very easy. Rook f5, king g6, b7, check. King h2, queen b4, and that's that. Black mops up. Very efficient play in the latter stages of the game by Danny Gormally. So I thought that was a very interesting clash, all-Grandmaster clash, a clash of styles, a clash of wills, and in the end, black managed to stamp his authority on the position.